we haven't been prioritizing civility in discourse or human connection as much because we're in such a digital age. And so when all of a sudden you have the confidence to say whatever you want to say to someone digitally, because you don't have to do it in person and you could avoid that person forever on and hide behind your screen, reflection and meditation is so important for civil discourse to be able to thrive. You have to take into account your own presence in conversations. You're getting angry, are you getting defensive? Why do you get defensive about certain things? That reflection is really important. The second, I would say, is active listening. And again, that questioning of why, if there isn't enough to listen to, because you need to understand people better. And that will inherently make you realize that you are not that different from people and that you are not incapable of finding common ground with people on topics that are really difficult or divisive.
Welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere, where CEOs, leaders, and experts at building teams,
companies,
organizations,
and amazing cultures share how to lead from anywhere in the world. I'm your co-host on the East Coast, Ginny Bianco Mathis.
And I'm your co-host on the West Coast, Mitch Simon. And we invite you to join us to Team Anywhere. Hello and welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere. I'm your host on the West Coast, Mitch Simon. And today on the podcast, we have Milan Kordestani. Milan is an entrepreneur and author. He's also a 3-time company founder focused on building sustainable businesses that drive positive social change at scale. The lack of civil discourse and constructive conversations motivated Milan, the 24-year-old 3-time social entrepreneur, to create The Dough, an anonymous digital publication promoting open-minded discussions and restoring civil discourse, God willing. It also led him to write I'm Just Saying, a guide to maintaining civil discourse in an increasingly divided world. Milan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Mitch. Nice to meet you.
Very, very excited. So you've got to tell us, you're a 24-year-old entrepreneur, 3-time social entrepreneur. Please tell us your background, your passion, and your motivation to create The Dough. Tell us a little bit about The Dough. But where are you coming from? Because probably one of the youngest guys we have on our show.
So I'm from the Bay Area. I'm first gen from Iranian immigrant parents. And from one side of it, I've always had to be really good or had to figure out how to navigate challenging conversation from, just being different. But from another aspect, it was through an average Gen Z life experience, which is growing up in an age of digital communication being more dominant than perhaps in-person communication, and seeing both the good and bad that's evolved from that. And so, I grew up in the Bay Area. Before I graduated high school, my first business was raising chickens, selling eggs, growing saffron, a Iranian spice that we use a lot, and selling that. And doing that got me into writing about the agriculture industry, which was my gateway into writing and publishing. And so I did that for several years. I wrote for the Huffington Post. I wrote for Entrepreneur. The Dough was the second startup I had built while I was in college. And I created The Dough because I got so tired of everything that myself and other people were publishing. It felt surface level. It felt boring. It felt like we were not having real conversations, but we were just trying to put content out there for brand building, for, to fall in line with what the publisher wanted us to say, just being, grateful to have a platform. And that was how we were made to feel in like an era of like deplatforming people. It was like, okay, you should just put out content, don't push the boundaries too far. And that was why I created a publication called The Dough. And, it plays on John Doe, Jane Doe, this idea that through anonymous publishing, we can remove all the ego, all the chance of canceling someone, and just say, what is the idea that they are putting out in the world? We're publishing because we believe there is value, so we're going to back it from that standpoint. But why does this perspective matter in the world? Like, what conversations can it spark? And that's it. And that's what we have to be doing as a society, is conducting civil discourse around challenging, uncomfortable, difficult topics, and doing that in a really solution-oriented way without just tearing people apart and canceling them.
Great. We're going to definitely talk about that all today, and hopefully you'll have some insights for us and also some suggestions for us. But I just got to go back. So chickens and saffron led to writing. How did that happen?
So I think I found writing as like a tool of expression. Some people have art, some people have music, they play instruments, and so on. For me, it was writing, and I felt like there were not a lot of youth perspectives in the agriculture industry. And at the time, I really thought that I was going to go into the agriculture industry, and that would be my future. I was like, I don't want to work in tech. I want to get as far from tech as possible, and live in my own little piece, being a farmer of sorts. But no, there were bigger dreams than that. But nonetheless, the agriculture industry, and I felt that there weren't enough youth perspectives, and so it was like I should start sharing mine. And it was very quickly like when you start putting your perspective out in the world, you get responses from people, and that's where like all the complexity lies.
Great. No, that's so great. It's so interesting. When my family moved to this country, it was all about eggs as well. So it was like the first big industry for my country was eggs. For my country was eggs. So it's great. So okay, so let's go to civil discourse. It's pretty awful. It's sometimes non-existent when it does exist. I don't know if we call it discourse because it's a lot of shouting and yelling and canceling. And so, from your perspective, why is there so much civil discourse today?
There's a lack of civil discourse today.
There's a lack of civil discourse today. Yes.
I think that this exists because we haven't been prioritizing civility in discourse or human connection as much because we're in such a digital age. And so when all of a sudden you have the confidence to say whatever you want to say to someone digitally, because you don't have to do it in person, and you could avoid that person forever on and so on, and hide behind your screen, there's one aspect of it there. But the other is that we're truly missing like the nuances of being able to connect with people that are different from us when we're living in this digital bubble at all times. So it's complex. One part of it is the lack of communication with people. Another part of it is too much information coming to us at one time, need to feel like you have to have an opinion and respond to everything immediately. There's several facets to why I think we have a lot of incivility today.
You said there's a lot of confidence to say something digitally. Is that called confidence? Is it confidence when I can shout to the world my opinions on anything and no one knows who I am?
It's keyboard courage is what the coined term is for it now.
Is that what it is? It's called keyboard courage,
Mm-hmm.
which is not courageous, by the way.
I agree. I think it's not courageous, right? Because you're hiding to an extent behind a screen, but the idea is that you gain the courage from your keyboard, right? Like you say something you would otherwise never have the courage to say.
So it's interesting. So it's kind of like as a leadership coach, as a human, we talk so much about vulnerability. It seems like the opposite of vulnerability because, what we find are, if I want to ask you for your opinion, you're most likely not going to tell me. But if you go away to your keyboard, you might tell me, you might tell a lot of people, but it's actually not very vulnerable because there's no risk in it.
Right. And vulnerability is so important in civil discourse because it's almost the entirety of how we create connection with people, right? Like, especially when you disagree with someone on a topic, one of the lessons I advocate for is continually asking someone why, because you're trying to understand their perspective. You're trying to understand how they got to that perspective that you might disagree with. But if you can kind of understand them on a human level, and they're willing to be vulnerable, tell you more, and walk you through, you'll probably be able to connect and eventually from there go and find common ground.
Do you think you're a Gen Z, right? I have a bunch of Gen Zs in my household. Do you think the Gen Z, your generation, is going to say enough is enough? I can't take it anymore, and actually help the rest of us? I mean, there's the generation that used to, before the internet, who used to just talk to each other. And then there's then there's your generation, which we're hoping could say enough of this stuff. Why don't we just all be humans again? I don't, what's your thoughts on that, Milan?
I can't say exactly on which generational divide it will fall on, but I do believe that there's going to be a generation that's going to be looking up at their parents saying, your whole life is public, your whole life is spent kind of digitally on the phone, overstimulated, too much information and so on. That's going to say, No, like we don't want to be constantly on our phones. We don't constantly want to have our whole childhoods and adulthoods be monetized via content. I think that'll be a really interesting pivot that'll come about. But even now, I think with Gen Z and my generation, the one thing I do know exists today is there was a lot of hesitance to want to be wrong or to say something out of turn. And thus, people are not taking risks in what they're saying, and we're not challenging ideas as much. And it's kind of like, when you live in a world where the mob can cancel anyone, even with the best of intentions, asking it questions, being curious, trying to learn more information can get you in trouble. I think, it's going to create a lot of mental health issues. It's going to create a lot of lack of progress in society is ultimately the biggest issue with this.
Great. So we're looking to people like you to publish books like, here's your book. I'm just saying. So, A Guide to Maintaining Civil Discourse in an Increasingly Divided World. Congratulations. As a 24-year-old author, there's, not many people out there like you, which is great. It's a great book. Tell us, what was the impetus, the inspiration for writing I'm Just Saying? And what does it help us with, and why should we read it?
I wrote I'm Just Saying because we just talked about how important vulnerability is in creating connection with people. And this was my attempt at that. It was to be vulnerable, to tell stories from my own life, to talk about people who have inspired me, to make me care about civil discourse, all to, at the end of the day, get the reader to care that they should be trying to conduct civil discourse in their life. They should be trying to create great connections with not just people that they know and love, but anyone they come across in their lifetime that maybe, at gut reaction, they might think they're different, but then give them that opportunity, because ultimately when we come together, despite our differences, the impact is greater. That's why we always advocate for diversity. Of course, I'm sure you do as well. And like the workplace and so on, like it's because those diverse opinions end up making greater products, greater solutions, a greater world. So that was the point of the book. It's help inspire people to show up better to conversations at an individual level.
What are the principles you have for creating dialogue amongst people who vehemently disagree? So what, if someone says, I'm not even going to read your book because I already know I don't like you or agree with you. So how do you help your generation, our generation, every generation to, to stand up? Because I think for a lot of it is, if you and I disagree and I tell you, Milan, no matter what you say, I am not going to listen to you, right? I've already decided the world is flat, and there is no whatever. I don't want to say anything that'll offend anybody, but the world's flat. Hopefully, what doesn't offend anybody. And no matter what you say, I will not listen to you. What do we do with that? Because there's a lot of people who are in that scenario.
I'd ask you if you're really lonely.
That is so good, Milan. That is so good. That's great. Touche.
Because here's the truth. Like this book, when I wrote it, I think of it for a category. I wrote the book because I believe civil discourse matters. People need to know this is a term. There's a term for this, and all of the things that matter. But what ended up happening was they put this book in the anger management and mood disorders and self-help category. And I ended up realizing how important that was, because a lot of times this incivility, the way to get to people is to ask them, like, how is their mental health? Because it's usually not good. If you are incivil, you are often angry. You are often upset. If you are judging others all the time and thinking that they are so different from you, you are probably internally judging yourself a lot. And so, recently the CDC came out and said, we have a loneliness epidemic in this country. And I truly believe that is like the crux of civil discourse, or like it points to civil discourse and the importance of it, because if you are not able to conduct these types of conversations in your life, if you're not able to connect with people through conversation, and you're always angry and you're always defensive, and I believe you're a miserable person. And so, yes, that's what I would ask you.
Are you lonely? I believe you're a miserable person. Probably make me not want to listen anymore to you, unless it hits me. It really, really hits me.
But it's hard to listen. when you're angry, you're usually thinking of the next thing you want to be saying. And that's part of the problem of like kind of jolting someone and being like, are you okay? Like, is this, why are you defending this? Like, do you actually care about what you're fighting against right now? Or is this just become a part of your identity and you can't let it go right now? Now that's a little bit like, you don't want to be rude, but, and so that's why I advocate for like the main question people should think about asking to conduct civil discourse when they're getting angry, when they're getting defensive, is to think of that like third grade child that is just constantly asking why. Like, wow, that's a really tall tree. Why is it so tall? Well, this tree probably had more water than the rest. Why did it have more water than the rest? Just why all the way. And when you do that with a person, like I mentioned a little bit earlier on in this call, like you end up getting so much perspective on why they are the person that they are. And it gives you a little bit more empathy for them because, understanding people inevitably gives you that empathy to be able to connect better.
Hey, we're taking a quick break to remind you to support our podcast by hitting the subscribe button and leaving us a review. Your feedback means the world to us, and it helps us continue to bring you more engaging and thought-provoking content for leadership and remote work. It's been said that, it's hard for us these days to find our heroes in our athletes, in our politicians, and sometimes with our teachers, sometimes with our religious, advisors. It's hard to find a lot of times, that ethical vein, someone telling us, connecting with people is important and listening to people is important and civil discourse is important. So what do you think it's going to take? It's going to be, again, back as your generation. What do you think it's going to take to turn the tide on something that seems like it's really out of the bottle, and dangerous, and exploding, and seems to be getting worse?
I think you are so spot on by pointing to the leaders being the problem. If we're not inspiring people to care about connecting with each other, to not see each other as so different from one another, our leaders being so divisive, like I get it, it sells. Like even at the Doe, the most controversial stories we'd publish would garner the most clicks. But a lot of times, like if that's all you're doing it for is to sell, like it's at the expense of people's sanity and happiness and just being a progressive society. So what I think it's going to take is a generation of, hundreds of people who are Mr. Rogerses and Oprah Winfrey's and, so on. People that can literally inspire you to see the importance of connecting with other people, giving someone the benefit of the doubt in difficult conversation. And I think it's going to be seeing a lot of people's heroes get canceled for things that are not cancelable, or that shouldn't be cancelable. There's a lot of reasons to cancel someone, and oftentimes it can be, I suppose, valid. But I think of people like J.K. Rowling, for example, and how, for her, it was a women's right questions that she was asking about, like, should we be, allowing children to make decisions about their gender at this, or their sex at this young of an age, and so on. And she just got completely canceled for that. They burned her books, they removed her from, classrooms and so on. And I think seeing that happen, a generation of people's heroes get canceled who, for just asking questions, that's going to be really hard. And I think that will push people to want to care a bit more.
So help me with that. I'm with you, Milan, I'm with you. Help me with how you would see a shift because I do think that, civil discourse is being able to say, help me understand why this is good or this is bad. And I'm just asking a question, right? That's Aristotle and Socrates. What will it take again for what movement do you think would happen where someone would say, this is not okay. We have no heroes. I have no friends, because with 7 billion people on the planet, each of those 7 billion has their own viewpoint, right? Which is not the same viewpoint as somebody else. And so I'm just looking for what it's going to take for for a generation to say, stop it. I'm just so lonely. I want to just connect to people and support people being human again.
I think it's going to take the mental health crisis. And I think we're getting into it now. I think that the declaration of a loneliness epidemic is really interesting. And I think being a global society now, we can connect with anyone, anywhere in the world instantly. There is so much diversity of thought and stories that are being told all the time that it's a lot to grapple with. And we have to start teaching in schools, how to be able to deal with all of that information and how to be able to develop your own opinion and what to do with that opinion and where to put it, because everything on the internet is permanent. And so, it starts with teaching it in school and such, but I think what it's going to take for people to really want to teach it in schools, want to prioritize it in culture and in society and in their parenting, it's going to be the mental health epidemic, because being lonely, being isolated, I think of like the people who moderate Wikipedia that just like sit in the, their basements. Like it's just, it's a lot of, I don't know, loneliness. Anxiety also, like the anxiety around connecting with people that are different from yourself. I think we have a generation, like my generation is very anxious.
Your generation is very anxious. Yeah. Yeah. It's the contrast with, I have, there's 7 billion people that I can, quote unquote, connect with almost at any time. And yet I have no connections with all those 7 billion. It's that contrast. And then the declaration of a loneliness epidemic, it's the epidemic exists, but nobody's really like, I know there are some people raising the flag, and I'm one of them. And yet, what? It's because it's such a social stigma to say I'm lonely, right? Because that would actually force me to connect with someone. And what we do know about loneliness is that loneliness causes us to take actions to forward more loneliness.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, a little bit. And you're right. No, there's still stigma around, talking about mental health. And I think that's part of the issue as well, right? Like if you don't want to talk about it, then that is going to further your loneliness, is feeling like you're suffering alone. The fact that there is an epidemic, we should know it's not uncommon. It's more common than not. What's interesting though is it is quite specific to this country, and a lot of Western societies that are individualistic societies. When we look at like these collective cultures, their problem is more like anxiety and fear of rejection from their communities and such, for messing up, not being able to meet standards and so on. And I think that difference is important to pay attention to, because, it's not to say those cultures don't have mental health issues either, but it's nuanced.
Yeah, no, it's different. It's I've lived in the Middle East. Your family comes from the Middle East. It's a lot different there. Its community is important. It's an important element. Okay, so what are some strategies that you're proposing that can help the listener, who can help the listener just with his or her own ability to have more inclusive conversations, greater civil discourse, and then maybe any prompts for anybody of any age listening to this podcast as to what you can do to kind of enhance and promote more civil discourse.
So the first, I'll give 2 tools. The first is like an internal one, which is reflection and meditation is so important for civil discourse to be able to thrive. You have to take into account your own presence in conversations. You're getting angry. Are you getting defensive? Why do you get defensive about certain things? That reflection is really important. So instead of standing in the shower and thinking how you could have re-said that argument so that you would have been right and proven your point, think about why you care so much about proving that point. And then the second, I would say, is active listening. And again, that questioning of why, if there isn't enough to listen to, because you need to understand people better. And that will inherently make you realize that you are not that different from people, and that you are not incapable of finding common ground with people on topics that are really difficult or divisive. So practicing and cultivating the skill of active listening. You're not listening to come up with your own argument or to respond quickly or to seem smart or be right. It's listening so that you can understand someone better, so you can connect with them better, and hopefully by the end of it, come to a better place. Find some common ground. And that's especially important with people in your life who you love, because you do not want to be divided from those people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've learned is, I can listen to you and I can share where you are, but I don't have to necessarily agree with you. But the point is, if I can't even listen to you, then yeah, we have no connection. So what are some projects that you're working on, or some products that you're working on right now to support your mission to change the world?
Great question. So there's one company I founded called Noda, and that company works with publishers. We work with Baltimore Banner. We work with the Chicago Tribune, a couple publicly traded companies that are holding companies for publications, and we're helping them scale their content. So we're trying to make sure that perspectives are getting amplified everywhere that people are. Articles from a lot of these most amazing local news publishers and so on are not being seen on social media because they're written first, and we live in a video first age, or audio first. And so using AI to quickly get those out is really important. And so that's a company called Noda. You can find that at heynota.com.
What is that? HEYNOTA.com?
That's correct. And then there's another company or a nonprofit I'm working on. It has not yet come to life, or it slowly will come to life throughout this year. But it's growing out of the dough, and the dough being that publication that was focused on anonymous publishing of marginalized voices. We want to expand that mission a bit to support other publications that are doing similar work that aren't just anonymous. And so doing that through a nonprofit is most logical, because we want it to be for the community, funded by the community, and to not be focused on just revenue generation. And that's super important, because these publishers do great work, but they are a little bit beholden on the clicks right now.
So before we go, I want to know, are there any stories or observations where you've witnessed people using your material? So you've seen someone who, again, was a flat Earth believer actually listen to someone who actually believes the crazy notion that the world is a globe. So, have you seen some of your methodologies work, and what has happened?
I have. So we published a lot of stories. We published a lot of stories from the LGBTQ community, and it was always really interesting to see people come and say, oh, wow, this is how my cousin feels and lives their life every time I treat them this way or say this to them or so on, and this is what their life is like. That, again, seeing someone's perspective from their eyes is so important. I'll give you a really specific one, which is we had a father come and talk about how he got married and had children and didn't really want to get married, but really didn't want to have children. And the kids are now, at the time of publishing the story a couple of years ago, they were like 14 and 16 years old. And he said he still doesn't love his children to this day, regrets having had children. And at the surface, you would think, wow, like that's horrible. But what was really amazing about that was you have to think about the loneliness part of it, which is that now all of a sudden we had 1,000 different men come into the comment section saying, I feel the same way. I thought I was alone and a horrible person. And thank you for showing me this. And like talking to me about how you cope with it and like find ways to be an amazing father despite struggling to care sometimes and so on. And so, it's really interesting to see like the different walks of life that are out there and the perspectives that are there. So doing that, allowing people to find connection is I think helpful.
Yeah, it seems to me that's the vein here, is providing outlets for people to be accepted for whatever they're thinking, because they're lonely. And perhaps the reason why they're so crazy about this person or that person or this type of idea is because internally there's a missing element. There's a loneliness that to work through that part to get people to be closer together. Great. So you've given us a couple ways to connect with you. So heynota.com, heynota.com. How else can we reach out and join your movement? Let's just say, Milan.
Yes. You could find me on all social media at Milan Kordestani or milankordestani.com. I have a newsletter as well. Please support the book. The writing is one part of it, but the companies are, of course, another. But yeah, please connect with me. And, I'm putting out content on all social media at all times. So just talking about these issues, I think, is really important. Getting people to care. That's cool.
I believe that this is just beginning for you. I could see, over the years, you're going to be a force to reckon with here in the U.S. and around the world. Thank you so much, Milan, for your time. And thank you so much for your passion and your care and your vulnerability. Thank you to our listeners. Please go ahead, share this episode with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and we'll see you next time on our next episode of Team Anywhere. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more engaging content from our podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share the video with your friends so they can join the conversation too.